Welcome back to another episode of Murderous Minors. War Baby here, and this is episode number 17. To Grandmother's House we go. When I think of grandparents, I imagine birthday checks, home-cooked meals, and warm hugs. Holidays and appearances at school functions usually round out the experience that many have with their grandparents, if they're lucky. When I think of grandmas, murder, especially at the hands of a loved one, does not immediately come to mind. However, I'm sure you aren't surprised that I'm here this week to bring not one, but two gruesome tales of slaughtered grandmas. Part 1. Joshua Wolf. All kinds of situations can take place in life that facilitate a grandparent raising their grandkids. Parents die, become incarcerated, or simply do not have the ability, means, or desire to be a parent. For the Lindleys, raising their grandson Joshua and his younger sister was just something they were committed to. In the spring of 2000, Carol Lindley, age 56, had over 2 decades in the healthcare industry, and she and Joshua had just relocated to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, from Westerville, Ohio. Joshua was 16 at the time, and he and Carol had moved ahead of his sister and grandfather, who both stayed behind in Ohio. Bill Lindley was fast approaching retirement age from the Kellogg Company, so he and Joshua's younger sister stayed behind to take care of business there before joining the rest of the family in Cape Girardeau. By early May 2000, Joshua had been enrolled in the 9th grade at R.O. Jackson Junior High School, and Carol had begun her new position as the Director of Case Management for St. Francis Medical Center. Nothing appeared amiss until Monday, May 7, 2000, when at 3:20 p.m., 16-year-old Joshua Wolf called 911 to report that he was trapped in his basement and his house was on fire. By the time the fire department arrived, he was in the driveway and had already told a neighbor that no one else was in the house. Joshua immediately told firemen, then paramedics, and then the responding deputies that he was in the basement when he heard a voice yell the peculiar statement, "Remember Mo." He then added that he was followed home from school by an unknown man in a white truck. The body of what appeared to be a female was quickly discovered, burned badly on the family room floor downstairs. Joshua was put into an ambulance and taken to the hospital for evaluation, and was determined to have sustained no injuries. While he was being evaluated, the major case squad went into action and began investigating what had quickly been determined to be a homicide. 56-year-old Carol Jean Lindley had been shot in the head before she was deliberately set on fire in her own home. As Joshua lay in the hospital with no injuries, authorities slowly uncovered bits of information around the scene that fast became incriminating evidence. Detectives established that Carol had been alive on Saturday, May 5th. Family members and phone records corroborated that her final phone call of that day had occurred at 3:29 p.m. That evening, investigators set out to interview Joshua as a witness. The 16-year-old recounted the events of his afternoon with a bit more detail than he had given initially. He began by reminding detectives that he had been followed home from school that day, although he hadn't lent much significance to this fact until he had heard someone call out, "Remember Mo." Mo having been his dad's mother, who he informed them had been murdered when he was 8. Joshua said that his dad had actually been a suspect, although the case remained unsolved. Come to think of it, Joshua mused that the stranger whom he had seen following him earlier slightly resembled his dad. This interview was recorded, and the next day a second recorded interview was conducted. However, that time Joshua was a suspect. Down in the basement of the burned home, ATM receipts were located in an area that would surely have burned had the fire spread just a bit further along its intended path. Bank records would later reflect that after killing his grandmother, Joshua used her bank card to withdraw several $100s over the weekend. With that money, he visited 2 different electronic stores on multiple occasions to purchase new stereo equipment for his grandmother's vehicle. Multiple receipts were found at the scene that showed Joshua had purchased and returned a few items over the weekend. Security footage showed him casually shopping and chatting with employees about car stereos. He ultimately purchased one, which he installed into his murdered grandmother's Dodge Durango on Sunday. The Durango that had been parked in the driveway while the house burned, not in the garage where it normally was, detectives later found out. During the second interview the day after the fire, Joshua was initially combative, telling police not to use reverse psychology on him. He had been Mirandized this time and at first told the same complicated story as he had the day before. When Lieutenant John Brown of the Major Case Squad pointedly asked Joshua if he had murdered Carol, he said, "Did not, and that's my final statement." It did not take too much longer for Joshua to realize that he was the only suspect. He spilled the entire unthinkable story, beginning with Friday. He recalled that in the evening, a satellite company technician had installed their new dish. They spoke a bit, and the tech would later recount to police that he witnessed a small tiff between the pair. Joshua had wanted a receiver box in his bedroom, but Carol didn't allow it. The technician also recounted Joshua mentioning that he would be attending a goodbye freshman dance that night, which he did. Major Case Squad members did interview Joshua's friends and others who were in attendance at the dance. No one reported any unusual behavior. On Saturday, Carol Lindley spoke with her daughter, her sister, and lastly her brother at around 3:30 that afternoon. That was the last time anyone had contact with the 56-year-old. Joshua stated that as his grandmother sat in a chair in the family room watching TV downstairs, he shot her in the head with a .22 caliber rifle from the second-story landing above. He said that he was mad at her and that they had been fighting. After school on Monday and before setting the fire, Joshua admitted to disposing of the spent shell casing down a pipe outside a neighbor's home, which he thought led to the septic tank. Joshua said that he intentionally put towels into the washing machine so that he could have a reason not to have heard any of the suspicious noise that would have been made by a stranger murdering his grandmother and torching the house above him. He told investigators, who by now realized that this child was cunning and manipulative, that he felt his plan was foolproof. To recap, this 16-year-old attended a dance on Friday night, shot his grandmother in the head on Saturday afternoon, then started withdrawing her money. He removed the factory-installed stereo and ultimately visited 2 stores, purchased and installed the one he preferred. He got out more money on Sunday, returned the other stereo, and visited another store for supplies. Monday, the day of the fire, he drove himself to school, stopping at the home of his carpool driver to tell her he no longer needed a ride. He said his grandmother had been given a new company car and that he would be driving the Durango. At R.O. Jackson Junior High School, he told teachers and administrators that although he had only been there for a week or 2, they would be returning back to Ohio after all. He turned in his books and closed out his lunch money account. He let the office know that his grandmother would be in later to complete the process and left campus around 1 p.m. Joshua returned home to finish off his plan. He poured gasoline all over Carol Lindley's body and all around the family room. Gasoline was poured up the stairs and down the hallway. He poured it in the guest room, on his bed, on the pair of bloody shoes, and on the shotgun leaned up against the wall. He changed out of his gas-soaked shoes and left those to be burned as well. He cut the grass to put the smell of gasoline on him. Joshua then turned on a burner on the kitchen stove and proceeded to ignite the fire. He went down to the basement to wait until he thought was the last minute before calling 911. Joshua told dispatchers that he was trapped in the basement by the fire and that to his knowledge he was the only person in the house. Renowned senior psychiatrist with the Biggs Forensic Center, Dr. Jerome Peters, performed a forensic evaluation of Joshua and felt that in his professional opinion, Joshua knew exactly what he was doing when he tried to burn their house down to cover up the fact that he had murdered his grandmother in cold blood. Joshua Allen Wolfe was charged as an adult with first-degree murder, armed criminal action, and arson, and went to trial in Boone County on a change of venue. He pled not guilty by reason of mental defect. In the end, Joshua received 2 concurrent life sentences, plus 7 years for the arson. The intention was that the teenager never be eligible for parole. The defense immediately filed appeals to the conviction. Remember during Joshua's second interrogation where he was Mirandized? Okay, now recall when he replied to the lieutenant's accusation of murder with the statement, "Did not, and that's my final statement." Well, Joshua claimed that this was his roundabout attempt at pleading the fifth and invoking his right to remain silent. The second appeal asserted that the court did not allow enough time prior to the start of trial for Joshua to have adequate psychological evaluations completed. Regardless, both points were rejected by Missouri Court of Appeals, and the concurrent life sentences and 7 years for arson were upheld with no eligibility for parole. Now let's jump ahead to 2016 and the Supreme Court ruling on Miller v. Louisiana, ruling life without parole unconstitutional for juveniles. Joshua saw this as a chance at freedom. Shortly after the announcement that he and 82 other juvenile offenders in the state of Missouri would be retried, he scheduled an interview with the media. It was ultimately canceled, however, he did issue a written statement. Here is some of what Joshua Wolfe, then 32 years old, had to say in 2016, after 16 years of incarceration. I am not sure if you are aware of my grandfather's unconditional love and support of me. It was his wife that was killed when I was 16. Even though my crime was directly against him, he still chose to extend unconditional love, forgiveness, and support to me to such a degree that he hired private attorneys to fight for me. Papa wanted me to receive help instead of being punished with incarceration. Papa Bill Lindley said in an interview that he felt that his grandson had made great progress and thought he was ready to be released from prison, ending with, "I have forgiven Joshua." His case did reach the Missouri Supreme Court in 2016, but was denied. A new law was in effect in Missouri which would allow juvenile lifers the chance for parole after 25 years. Even though the court has previously stated that he would never be eligible for parole, he now will be, in 2028, around the age of 44. Regardless, Joshua petitioned for a writ of habeas corpus, an official term for a court order that would require government officials to provide a valid reason for his continued incarceration. By this time, Joshua Wolfe had been incarcerated longer than he had been alive when he committed his crime. The Supreme Court of Missouri denied his writ of habeas corpus, effectively exhausting all appeals at the state level on June 3, 2018. Joshua Wolfe, now 34, has a petition for habeas corpus relief currently pending at the federal level. He's currently housed at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri. There is one uncomfortable element to this case that I haven't mentioned yet, and frankly, I almost don't want to. Don't say I didn't warn you. Skip ahead 10 seconds now if you don't want to hear something seriously disturbing. In both confessions Joshua made to police, he told them that he sexually